So there are two primary deities to begin with, Apsu and Tiamat. Now in order to understand that, well, here's how the Mesopotamians conceptualized the world. There was a, let's call it a disk, that's salt water. Well, why? Well, what happens when you go to the end of the continent? Salt water everywhere, right? So wherever you go, you run into salt water. So that's the disk that surrounds everything. Now, why is it a disk? The world is a dome on a disk. Why? Well, say you're standing in the middle of a field. What does the world look like? A dome on a disk. So it's a phenomenological representation. So the bottom of the dome is the ground on which you stand. What happens if you dig? You hit water, fresh water. So the dome of the land is on a disk of fresh water. What happens if you go to the edge of the land? You run into salt water. The dome of the land is on a disk of fresh water on a disk of salt water. Okay, those are the two gods. Tiamat is god of salt water, and Apsu is god of fresh water. Tiamat is female, and Apsu is male. And they're locked together in an inseparable embrace. And they give rise to their first category of children. And those are the, I think you could think about them as the elder gods. Now, what do they represent? Well, the question is, what do the gods represent? And they represent sort of like primary modes of being. It's something like that. So think about Ares, or Mars, the god of war. Well, that's a representation of single-minded aggression. And then you can think about Eros, or Venus, which is a primary representation of sexuality. And you might say, well, why are those deities? Well, that's simple. They live forever, and they control you, and their personalities. So that's that for that. It's like, yes, obviously. You know, and you know that you're under the sway of anger, you're not in control of yourself. If you're under the sway of erotic possession, you make a fool out of yourself. You're a tool of the power that drives the continuation of the species forward. Hunger is the same thing. Any primordial motivational drive we've conceptualized in this class as a personality. But those are transcendent personalities, and they're eternal. They're forever. And so that's why the Greeks, for example, thought that human beings were just the playthings of the gods. And this idea is echoed in the Mesopotamian stories. So then you can think about it sort of neurodevelopmentally as well, is that out of nothing, out of culture and nature, emerges, say, the two-year-old. The two-year-old is a battleground of primary motivational forces. And something like that is being hinted at in the Mesopotamian creation story. The first progeny of the fundamental union of chaos and order, Apsu and Tiamat, is the proliferation of these primary motivational forces. And what happens? They're very noisy. They run around doing all sorts of things. You could think about them as grown-up two-year-olds causing all sorts of trouble. The first thing they do is kill Apsu and make their home on his corpse. It's brilliant. Now the story doesn't say much about Apsu other than that. The culture deity, the primary culture deity is not elaborated up that much in the Mesopotamian story. And I think that's probably because at the time of the Mesopotamians, civilization was new enough so that we really hadn't mapped the mythology of culture. The Egyptians did that much more, and I know I told you that story first, but that's just how it goes. So the elder gods make their home on the corpse of Apsu. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's sort of how it is. You inhabit the corpse of culture, right? It's the dead past. But it's not just the dead past. One of the things that's very cool about the Mesopotamian story is that the elder gods are foolish enough to kill it. It's the death of God, by the way. It's no different from what Nietzsche pronounced. This has been going on for a very, very long time, this collapse of belief systems. They kill it carelessly because they don't understand what it is that they need to survive. They kill it carelessly, and then they try to live on the corpse. I think that's what the postmodernists do, by the way, because they assume we have this tremendous system of value that's been built up across time, and it sustains us, and everyone is criticizing it and trying to destroy it. And it's, well, we live in its corpse, and that won't nourish us forever. It has to be replenished, and there's nothing in the postmodernist philosophy that can act to replenish. Anyways, they kill Apsu. What happens when you kill order? Chaos comes back. Tiamat. And so Tiamat thinks, all right, enough of this. She wakes up and she thinks, oh, I'm going to wipe them all out. Now these gods, they're gods, eh? I mean, they're not trivial characters, but they're pretty worried because they're gods, but Tiamat is their mother. She gave birth to them. She's Mother Nature. And if she's angry about it, then the jig's up. And so what Tiamat does is she prepares this army of monsters. And they're described. There's, I think, 13 different kinds of monsters, and they're chimeric images. They're images of, you know, they're like dragons. They're half snake and half bird and half animal, and they're monstrous images. And they're sort of the Mesopotamians' attempt to imagistically represent those things that might come forward as an onslaught. And so it generates a whole 13 major monsters and then puts a whole army behind them, and she elects one of them, Kingu is his name, as head monster. So he's, for all intents and purposes, he's an early representation of Satan. He's like king of the bad guys, and it's important to know about him because something happens later in the story. So Tiamat's preparing her army of monsters, chimeras, to wipe out the gods. And so they're like shorting out about this, but while they're doing it, they're still making a lot of racket and living the high life in Apsu's corpse and propagating. And while they're doing that, they send out one god after another to combat Tiamat, and they all come back failed. So whatever these elder gods are, whatever they represent, they're not whatever it is that can confront chaos successfully and prevail. They're powers, but they're not whatever that is, that ultimate power. And that's what the Mesopotamians are trying to figure out. Who or what is king of the gods? And king of the gods is the thing that confront chaos and regenerate order. So they keep producing new gods, and one day they produce Marduk. He's born, and Marduk is a whole new category of god, and every one of the gods knows it, and he's got some very strange attributes. One of them is he can speak magic words. And so when Marduk speaks, the night sky transforms into the day sky and vice versa. So he's the verbal capacity. It's a massive discovery. It's a massive discovery by the Mesopotamians, because it's the first time we know of that the idea that it's the capacity for communicative speech as the primary deity should be at the top of the dominance hierarchy. It's one of the most remarkable discoveries of the ages. And he also has eyes all the way around his head. So Marduk is the thing that can speak and see. And it's the thing that's, so all the gods think, wow, well this is a whole new thing, man. How about you go out and combat Tiamat? Well, it doesn't sound like much of a picnic, you know. The logical thing for any sensible god to say is, how about no? But Marduk doesn't say that. He says, look, I'll make you guys a deal. You get yourself together in a hall, you know, and you have a vote, for all intents and purposes, and you vote me king of the gods. And allow me from here on in to determine destinies. That's exactly what the Mesopotamians say. He gets the tablet of destiny, and he's now in control of it. So the Mesopotamians are working out this idea that it's the thing that can see and that can talk that should be the thing that guides destiny, especially if destiny involves having to go into combat with chaos itself and restructure the world. And so Marduk says, those are the terms. I'll do it, but I'm king of the gods. And they all think, well, the fool's going to go out there and get killed anyway, so, you know, what do we have to lose? And so they agree, and so Marduk goes out to combat Tiamat, and he takes a net and a sword, and he, if I remember correctly, he fills her with a wind, which is, I believe, part of the manifestation of this voice idea. He fills her with a wind, he encapsulates her in a net. Now think about what that means. You can capture a predator in a net and then cut it up, but there's no difference between that. There's a tight analogy between that and encapsulating something novel in a conceptual network, which then enables you to cut it up into something useful. Okay, so that's what happens. Marduk goes out, he confronts Tiamat, he overcomes the monsters, and he kills Kingu. And then he cuts Tiamat into pieces, and he makes the world. And then that's the world that human beings live on. And he makes the human beings to serve the gods. Okay, so that's the first part of the story. Now he also kills Kingu, and he makes human beings out of the blood of Kingu. Now that's a hell of a story, right? Because Kingu is king of the demons, and human beings are the creature that's made out of the blood of the king of the demons. And it's a very similar idea to the later sort of Egyptian and Judeo-Christian ideas that there's a satanic element to being that's also characteristic of human beings. And part of that is, well, what's the difference between human beings and every other element of being? And the answer to that is, human beings can deceive you, right? We're the only creatures that can do that. We're capable of deception, voluntary deception. We're capable of malevolence. Okay, so one of the cool things about this story, so that's Marduk. Now, here's what's so interesting about that. The Mesopotamians, they've got this story about the deities and how they organized themselves to respond to the emergence of chaos and how to master it. You go after it, you declare yourself the thing at the top of the dominance hierarchy, your eyes and speech, you go out there voluntarily, you encapsulate the chaos, you cut it into pieces, and you make the world. That makes you top god. Brilliant, bloody, absolutely phenomenally brilliant. So what happens, that's what's happening in the heavenly domain, let's say. What happens in the earthly domain? The emperor of the Mesopotamians is Marduk. He's the manifestation of Marduk on earth. And he has to be a good Marduk. That's because he might say, well, why should you be king? Well, the answer to that is, well, you're most powerful. No, that's not going to work. Some other weasels will take you out. Why should you be king? Well, because you pay attention and you speak properly and you keep chaos at bay and you make ingenious things happen as a consequence. So that's what the bloody Mesopotamians were trying to work out. What should be sovereign and why? Okay, so what did they do? In the New Year's ceremony, so imagine that the king is in a walled city, right? So that's the king's at the top of the dominance hierarchy. He's the eye at the top of the pyramid in a walled city with chaos outside. Chaos is outside. That's the domain of Tiamat. At the New Year's ceremony, the old year, we know about that, we still have this idea. The old year is an old man. The new year is about to be born. There's an intermediary period of chaos. That's New Year's Eve, right? That's the intermediate period of chaos where all the rules are temporarily suspended, which is why you can go out and party like there's no tomorrow, New Year's Eve, and before the new year is born. The Mesopotamian emperor and all of his retinue and the people go outside the city on New Year's Eve, and they take statues that represent the gods, and they act out the story that I just told you with the statues. And as part of that, the emperor has to take off all his garbs, his garments that make him king, and kneel in front of the priest, and the priest, if I remember correctly, slaps him with a glove, it's something like that, and tells him that he has to tell everyone why in the last year he wasn't a very good Marduk and how he's going to do better in the future, which is exactly, by the way, what you do when you make your New Year's, what do you call those? Yes, the ones you immediately break the next day. But it's the same, it's this renewal idea, and it happens in the depth of darkness in the middle of the winter before the light comes back, right? That's why it's set up that way. So anyways, and so as long as the emperor is a good Marduk, then that's why he gets to be emperor. And if he's not a good Marduk, then, well, someone else should be emperor.